Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to some more urban legends. So these ones, it says they come under the category of surprise. So I'm not really sure what it's going to mean for these urban legends. Anyway, we'll just jump into it. If you hear any snoring in the background, it's storm at the moment, but they are all asleep, so they all could snore at the same time, who knows? Right now it's just storm, but I'm just warning you. So the first urban legend is human pillars. An earthquake hit Hokkaido, Japan, in the 1960s and badly damaged buildings and infrastructure. In the aftermath, rescue workers were exploring an old tunnel that had partly collapsed on a railway line. They were looking for survivors or anybody's to recover, but what they found was far more frightening. As they chipped away at the cracked walls, they discovered row upon row of human skeletons in the wall, standing as if to attention, side by side. They must have been there since the tunnel was built, more than 50 years before. They immediately knew what they had found as stories of human pillars. They'd been circulating around the country since the 17th century. People who had sealed inside walls and pillars of buildings, with people in it obviously, either as a punishment or as a cruel form of sacrifice to appease the gods, and bless the structure with strength. The practice was thought to have been outlawed centuries ago, but some believed that the grisly tradition had continued for far longer than that. To this day, the tunnel is avoided by anybody who knows the story. The next urban legend is called Watch This. A confident lawyer, one of the senior partners, working for a New York law firm, was entertaining a group of interns at a party in the skyscraper where the firm's offices were located. He would often joke with the team that the floor-to-ceiling windows in the building were literally unbreakable, testing their strength as a party piece. Once again, he shocked the students by putting the windows to the test. He ran across the room, launched his body at the glass, and bounced right off, having proved his point. He decided that his audience weren't convinced enough, so he had another go. This time, everyone present heard a terrible crack as the window fell out of its frame and watched, horrified, as the lawyer fell with the glass into the street below from the 24th floor. The firm closed down shortly thereafterwards. That's a very well-known urban legend, that. The next is called Secret Store, and it's fairly recent. A bizarre news story made the rounds online in 2015, reporting that employees at Walmart department stores got the shock of their lives when they discovered that a homeless couple had been living in a disused storeroom on the top floor of the building for as long as 2 years. It's not known how the couple came to move into their secret accommodation, but they lived a life of luxury, moving whatever they wanted from the store to their pied-à-terre, including a king-size bed, television, and fridge freezer. When the items were reported missing, their disappearance was dismissed as petty theft or errors in stock-taking. The pair were only rumbled when they invited homeless friends round for an all-night party at the store, and their guests, somewhat the worse for wear, were caught leaving by staff opening in the morning. The next is called How to Catch a Bullet, and there's many people that will be aware of this urban legend. A magician called Chung Ling Soo wowed his audience by catching bullets fired at his head with his teeth and spitting them out onto a plate. His crowning glory was getting members of the audience to pick bullets for 2 guns and scratching a personal mark into them. 2 assistants then fired at Chung, and he would miraculously pick the autograph bullets out of his mouth, totally unarmed, to the shock and delight of the audience. One night, when Chung was performing in London, he chose audience members for the two-gun finale and waited for the weapons to go off. They did, and he was shot in the chest at point-blank range. He cried, "I've been shot! Lower the curtain!" and died the day after. The audience were horrified. Not only did he not catch the bullet, but Chung was also not supposed to know any English, and he had never before spoken a word on stage. It turned out that he was not Chinese, but an American called Robinson, and he couldn't really catch bullets in his teeth. As his wife explained after his death, the magician had used sleight of hand to swap the marked bullets, which he placed between his teeth, with unmarked ones. The guns and his assistants fired, containing unmarked bullets, and then modified to direct the flash from the pan to the blank charge. As the guns were never properly fired, they were never properly cleaned, resulting in a build-up of gunpowder. On the night of his death, the powder in one rifle caught, and the explosion fired the real bullet at Robinson. The mystery was solved, but nobody explained why put real ammunition in the weapons. Yeah, that would be my asking, like, if it's all just like a sleight of hand, etc., why put real bullets in there in the first place then? And I mean, if you're putting real bullets in a gun, it's a well-known fact. You've got to clean it. I mean, that's just how it is. It's a bit bizarre in all, I think. The next is called The Toast. Everybody who was anybody in town was enjoying the biggest society wedding of the year. The ceremony had gone like clockwork, and the groom was about to give his after-dinner toast. He thanked all the right people, complimented his beautiful wife, as well as her father for putting on such a sumptuous reception, and for the very generous honeymoon to the Caribbean, and finally thanked his best man for organising the stag party and for not losing the rings. The groom announced that he had a special gift for the best man, who he had known since they were at college together, and he gave him a small watch box. When the best man opened it and saw its contents, he turned white, smiled awkwardly at the groom, sat down, and polished off a large glass of wine. The groom then thanked all the guests for coming and for the fantastic wedding presents the lucky couple had received. In return, he had provided a small token of his appreciation for everyone present. So could they all please check under their chairs? Taped to the bottom of their seats were the same picture, and a gasp went up simultaneously around the room. It was a photograph of the bride and the best man together in bed. Nobody knew what to say, but then the groom spoke up again, declaring that he had a great dinner and was now off on his honeymoon alone. It's safe to say that the best man hadn't received a watch at all. Yeah, that's, yeah, wow. Imagine that on your wedding day. But, like, he knew and he still married her, which is really weird. Because, and then again, maybe it's for the money, you know. If her dad's rich, he marries her. Once they're married, it becomes 50-50. So even if he did know that she was cheating, he can now prove that she was cheating, and the 50-50 may go out of the window, and he may just get everything. So we move on to the next set of urban legends. They come under crime, and I'm not sure if we'll have heard any or not, but let's get into it. Dude, where's my car? One day in 1978, a group of children in Los Angeles were digging in their garden, perhaps hoping to strike lucky, find a coin or a piece of discarded jewellery, or maybe an old toy car, when their shovels hit something very big and very hard. When they scraped away the dirt, they saw what appeared to be an unmistakable roof of a car, not quite what they were expecting to find in a suburban garden. The boys contacted the police, and by the time the authorities had roped off the area and carefully excavated the hole, they realised that it wasn't just a roof, it was indeed the whole car. And not just any car, but a 1974 Ferrari Dino 246 GTS, which was in reasonable condition, considering where it had spent the last few years. It naturally crossed the minds of the investigating officers that this might be an elaborate way of hiding bodies or drugs, but the car was empty. It had been crudely sealed with sheets and tape on the doors, so the burial seemed to be intentional. But who had left it there, and why? The car, which was estimated to be worth around 20,000, that's, by the way, over 70,000 today, let's bear that in mind, still bore the vehicle identification number, which is unusual for thieves to leave intact. So the authorities were able to track down the last owner. He had reported it stolen off the street 4 years earlier, when he and his wife were having dinner in a restaurant. The car wasn't found. For obvious reasons, he eventually received a large insurance payout. None of the locals in the kids' neighbourhood remembered anybody buying or burying a Ferrari at the time or selling a Ferrari, and you would think someone would have noticed it had it been actually stolen and put there. As one of the investigating officers remarked, it's not like planting cabbages. The tenants living in the house knew nothing of the buried treasure, nor did the current occupants, who had only moved in a few months previously. Was it insurance fraud? Had the car owner decided he couldn't afford to run a Ferrari, planted the vehicle underground and claimed the insurance? Or had some actual thieves come up with an ingenious method of hiding loot from the police? The recovered car now belonged to the insurers, who put it up for auction at less than half its value. It was bought and eventually restored by a mechanic, who finished the car, and he had the registration dug up, similar to that. The similar vehicles today are worth upwards of 400,000. So why was the car buried? The rumour was that the owner hired a couple of career criminals to steal the Ferrari, asking them to dump it in the ocean so he could collect the insurance premium. When the crooks saw what they had on their hands, however, they decided they would keep it for themselves, hiding the car underneath the yard of the unsuspecting householder and planning to come back for it one day. The thieves were never caught. But it's nice to imagine that they eventually returned with shovels to the spot, only maybe to find it's gone. Now, the one thing about that is I'm going to say it's more likely an insurance job because, believe me, if a thief's going to steal a car at that day and age as well, when we're less advanced, I'm sure they would have took it and sold it and something would have been done with it, I don't think they'd have buried it in a garden. I'm pretty sure that's an insurance job. The next is called Bonnie and Clyde, and we all know who Bonnie and Clyde are, I'm sure. If you don't, you really should. Legendary bank robber Clyde Barrow, of Bonnie and Clyde fame, was known for two things: his ruthlessness and his uncanny ability to evade the police after jacking a joint. He was a getaway car connoisseur. It helped him to have the best vehicle available at your disposal when you needed to outrun the law. Historians recently unearthed a letter from Clyde to motorcar pioneer Henry Ford, in which he proclaims his love for the Ford V8, his stolen getaway vehicle of choice, where he and his accomplice would eventually die in the hail of bullets. The letter states that Barrow always drove Fords, at least when he was able to get his hands on one for a job. The letter actually says this: "While I still have got breath in my lungs, I will tell you what a dandy car you make. For sustained speed and freedom from trouble, the Ford has got ever sick. Other cars skinned, and even if my business hasn't been strictly legal, it don't hurt anything to tell you what a fine car you got in the V8. Yours truly, Clyde Champion Barrow." The motoring magnate received the message only a month before the shootout. Maybe he knew he was going to die. The next is the dark web. I'm just going to get on with it. I don't particularly like talking about the dark web or the deep web, not places I will ever go. But anyway, let's get into it. Even outwardly normal and intelligent people can be seduced by the dark side of cyberspace. In 2004, British police received an emergency call from a teenager who had been attacked in a city alley. He spent a week in critical condition in hospital and, despite receiving serious stab wounds to internal organs, he managed to survive. The boy told the police that an older man, dressed in black, had committed the crime unprovoked. and was even able to give a detailed description, so an appeal was broadcast on the news for any witnesses to come forward. When the police studied surveillance camera footage of the ally, however, they realised that the case was a lot more complex than it had first appeared. It would lead to them going into the dark side of the internet. The camera captured the victim on the scene, but with him was another teenage boy, whom he hadn't mentioned to the police. There was no sign of the alleged man in black. After the victim was confronted with the evidence, he said that the other boy had attacked him in the alley, but he didn't know why. The story didn't make sense until detectives searching through the boy's computers uncovered the fact that the two had met previously in an internet chat room. After trawling through thousands of messages between the pair, police gradually unravelled the bizarre case. The victim, known as Jack, as he was too young to be publicly identified, had spent half a year ensnaring Max in an elaborate deceit. Jack pretended to be several different characters in the chat room to fool Max into doing what he wanted. He initially pretended to be a girl who introduced Max to her brother, who was actually Jack himself. He then created other fictional characters, including a girlfriend and Secret Service agents inspired by James Bond films. Police eventually linked all the false identities to Jack because they all made the same spelling mistakes in the chat room. Max, who was convinced that the characters were real and that Jack was dying of an incurable illness, was persuaded by a fake female Secret Service agent to do what she ordered in order to serve the British intelligence services. He believed that if he passed the test, he would be entrusted with a firearm, meet the British Prime Minister, and receive a large amount of cash. Max's big test, if he wanted to be a spy, was to murder Jack. It was incitement to commit murder. His own murder, said the policeman in charge of the investigation. On the day in question, Max travelled to Jack's hometown and carried out the attack, believing that he was working for the British Secret Service. He was convicted of attempted murder, and Jack was charged with inciting his own murder, the first ever such charge. Neither boy was jailed. The judge summed up the affair. Skilled writers of fiction would struggle to conjure up a plot such as which things arise here. Right then, that's bizarre, to say the least, isn't it? The next is called Serial Scoop. The citizens of Macedonia became transfixed by a series of grisly murders of elderly women from the same town. I've not heard this one myself. Police suspected the crimes to be the work of a determined and thorough sadistic serial killer. Worried members of the public turned to the pages of a small local paper for the latest details, as it always had the juiciest information on the terrible crimes. The reporter on the story, a seasoned crime journalist with over 20 years' experience on the job, seemed to have a fascinating insight into the mind of the killer. With each murder and each report in the paper, the police began to become suspicious. They wondered who the reporter's source was and thought there might be a leak in the investigation. The information he was revealing had never been released to the public, so did that mean he was in communication with the murderer? None of the other journalists covering the story knew, for example, that the murderer had used a telephone wire to strangle his victims. Then, an incredible scoop, the paper revealed where one of the bodies might be buried, and when the police checked it out, the location turned out to be correct. And it wasn't long before another body was discovered, thanks to the investigative reporter. The police made a breakthrough of their own and arrested the reporter on suspicion of committing the murders. They discovered that DNA evidence linked him to the victims. Wall knew his mother and looked like her too. The journalist was charged with 2 murders and suspected of 2 others, but unfortunately killed himself in custody before he would be put on trial, taking the final story all the way to his grave. Jeez. Would make sense for the journalist to be actually committing the murders, though, when he has all this information, right? The next is called In the Firing Line. A story concerning a pair of poachers who had been picked up by the police, appeared in a local Scottish newspaper. The officers were alerted after the suspects crashed their truck on a remote estate in the mountains. After talking to the men, the police asserted that they had been travelling back to their village following a successful hunt late at night, but the truck's headlights had failed and they couldn't continue. They tracked the problem down to a fuse box near the steering wheel, and one of them remembered hearing in the pub that you could use a .22 caliber bullet as a temporary fuse. So he removed one from his rifle and placed it in the box. The headlights came back on and they continued their journey. Just before they pulled onto the notoriously dangerous pass that sloped away from into the deep valley, they heard a loud bang and the driver cried out in pain, just as the truck veered off the road and crashed into a tree. The improvised fuse had overheated and exploded, firing straight into the poacher's groin. They were promptly arrested and, despite one of them needing to undergo a rather sensitive surgical procedure, the poachers were relieved. If the bullet had exploded when they were on the mountain pass, well, then they might not have survived at all. The next is a whodunit. A French crime writer finished his latest book and sent it to the publisher, who read it with horror. It was a thriller that explored 7 ways in which the narrator might have killed his wife. A disturbing topic. And given that the writer's real-life wife had disappeared without a trace a year before, it was particularly shocking. The author had been the prime suspect in the disappearance, but police had dropped the charges due to lack of evidence and the lack of a body. The publisher rejected the manuscript as too unpleasant. In one of the fictional deaths, the body was put through a meat grinder and then forgot about it. But rumours surrounding the book's existence began to leak out, and the writer seemed to revel in them. He even commented to neighbours that a hole he was digging in his garden was big enough for a body. But still, nobody had been found. When asked about his wife by interested journalists, he made cryptic comments that did nothing to dampen suspicion of his guilt. But eventually, he remarried and he moved to a different city. The writer was finally arrested after the family, who moved into his old house, dug up the garden and found a human skeleton buried under a shed, later identified as his missing wife. He confessed to killing her and was jailed. He had beaten her to death, buried her under the concrete, and reported her missing. He never explained why he killed her, nor why he wrote the gruesome book that threatened to expose his crime, which has yet to see the light of day. Well, they're not going to publish it now, are they? Because he's a murderer, and I don't know though. Most when you look at murderers and those on death row, some of them they do publish books and they even sell paintings and things. So, I mean, it could be published. I don't know. The next is true crime. In the year 2000, a businessman was abducted, tortured and murdered in a Polish city. His body was found in a river, and investigators discovered that he had been bound and strangled. The police had few leads to go on, and the trial eventually ran cold. The case was closed and filed away as unsolved for several years, until one of the investigating officers read a violent thriller by a local crime writer, whose plot he found very interesting indeed. In the book, a woman is abducted, tortured and killed in the manner identical to the 2000 murder, and what's more, the perpetrator gets away with it. The author was questioned but released without charge on lack of evidence, as he claimed that he had read about the case in the papers at the time and merely thought it would make for a good story. However, the veteran policeman was still suspicious. He had uncovered the fact that the writer, known to be a jealous and extremely controlling man, had an ex-wife who had been in a relationship with a man found in the river. Although it was never proved that he committed the crime, the court noted that the villain in his book bore a strong resemblance to his creator, and ruled that the writer must have been involved in the original murder. Almost 10 years after the crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. The authorities are keeping their guard up, however, as the killer author is said to be working on a second volume in prison. Yeah, like I said, kind of one of those things that happens. They do get to, have books that go out and such. So it's possible, I suppose. Anyway, the next is carpet people. Why do people in movies put bodies in carpets? Isn't that a little impractical? Do bodies really get rolled up in a spare rugs? In the 1980s, 3 college students in New York were walking back to their apartment on the west side of Manhattan when they noticed a carpet rolled up on the pavement and promptly carried it home. It's not known why they actually did this, but they were students after all. They commented on how heavy it was, and one said that it was probably meant that it was good quality. When they got the item back to their apartment and unrolled it, they were surprised to find a dead body inside. A man who had been shot in the head. They thought they were going to decorate their little dorm room, explained a policeman who was investigating the grisly find. They probably lost their enthusiasm for interior design pretty quickly after that. The next is called Human Harvest. A gang of sadistic criminals who seemed to be killing at random terrified the population in a remote region of Peru in 2009. Locals had not forgotten the tales of pishtacos, ancient demons that would kill people and eat their body fat. The gang would lie in wait for passers-by on lonely roads, lure them into rainforests with promises of work and then kill them. If this wasn't scary enough, the police investigation revealed that these modern devils really were pishtacos. They were harvesting their victims' body fat to sell in the country's capital for use in skin cosmetics. The authorities believed that they had been active for years. They may have killed more than 60 people to keep their macabre business afloat. The gang's method was to dismember their victims, hang their torsos from hooks and slowly cook them until the fat dripped into tubs. When the police finally arrested them, they were found to be in possession of several bottles of liquidized human lard, which fetches high prices on the international black market. Ew. Can you imagine putting that on your skin? Ugh, no. The next is Mafia TV. Italian authorities have recently revealed that the country's powerful mafia clans hijacked a popular football television show in order to send encrypted messages to their associates in prison. The messages went undetected for months and even reached gangsters who were kept in isolation, supposedly as to stop them communicating with their accomplices. Criminals who appeared to be watching the latest football scores on TV were actually keeping up to date on the mafia news by reading text messages sent into the show by viewers. The messages, disguised as comments from fans, scrolled along the bottom of the screen, but the show's producers were none the wiser and did not know about their specialist audience. The ruse was only discovered when authorities intercepted a letter to a jailed godfather, in which his underlings suggested that he watch the football show. Incarcerated Italian mafiosa have always dreamt up creative ways of bypassing authorities in order to send messages to the outside world. One jail boss received information about his trial over the radio from underlings who requested songs with particular meanings. A Naples mob went further and bought an entire radio station so that they could broadcast songs that were requested and dedicated, containing coded messages for their colleagues in jail and colleagues on the run. I didn't know about that. That's interesting. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people do watch football as well, so that wouldn't be surprising. It's a creative way, though. Anyway, that's this part of urban legends done. And like I said, I think I don't know if they come under crimes as such. I mean, they are crimes, but are they urban legends? I don't know. Some of them would seem more factual than urban legend. Maybe some circumstances surrounding them are mythical, I suppose, or they have a little bit of lore or myth to them, but not sure I see them as actual urban legends, more of things that actually happened with a mystical sense to it. But anyway, thanks for listening and many blessings.